Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
We have taken a look at the structure and process dimensions of business organizations, especially those with an engineering base. We would now move on to the concerns of design issues in running organizations and look at what it is that takes to deliver in a functioning system. It is important to understand design concerns, because design has to do with the way a set of tasks are pulled together. It has also to do with designing the channels of flow of work, which in turn raises issues of decision centers and information centers. We have to be clear that there will be a design of work irrespective of whether it has been consciously designed or not, and I have said so even while looking at the concerns of structure and processes. These are natural patterns which emerge in a work situation. Only when we try to manage successfully, we try to put it in a conscious frame to make sure that work gets done in minimal time with optimal effectiveness. Consider an illustration of a post office. You go to a post office to send 2 registered letters. As you enter the post office, you find that the labeling and the signages system of the place is either covered up with posters of one variety or another, or have faded, or are loosely hinged, and you really do not have a level of comfort in trying to figure out which window deals with what. So, you fumble your way through and you discover that there is an inquiry window, and you go to that inquiry window, and after some jostling you are able to strike a conversation with the person behind the counter, and he tells you that the steps you have to go through is first to get your letter weighed and then get the necessary stamps, and then go to yet another third counter where they will register your letters receipt, and it should be on its way. So, with a bit of luck, you try to locate the counter where your envelopes will be weighed, and again the same jostling. Say you take another 4 minutes to reach the counter, and then your letters are weighed and they tell you what the appropriate stamp should be worth to carry that kind of weight. So, you spent 6 minutes at the inquiry counter, another 5 minutes at the weighing counter, and now it is your turn to get to the stamp vending counter. When you get there, you find that the situation is not very different, but there are at least 7 or 8 people ahead of you waiting for their own turn to get their stamp. So, you spend there another 7 minutes trying to get the stamp, by which time you have already spent 18 minutes in the process. Then you try to discover the counter where the registered envelopes or the envelopes to be registered are being received, and you spend another 5 minutes getting to the counter, only to be told that that counter receives envelopes which are numbered more than 3. For registration of envelopes less than 3, you have to go to yet another counter. So, your luck never seems to hold, and now you are in a jostling space of yet another counter, which takes you another 4 minutes to get there, and you get another 3 minutes for the person to write out your receipt for having received that precious consignment which is in your hand, and you total it, it comes to 30 minutes in all. So, you decide to take it up with the appropriate authorities. The appropriate authorities are responsive, and say within a fortnight the post office has undergone a change. Instead of there being separate counters for weighing, vending of stamps, writing out the registration slip, they have put together all this under 2 counters. One counter which receives envelopes less than 3, another counter which receives envelopes more than 3, but all in all it is the same counter which is weighing, vending stamps, issuing you the receipts, and when you go next time again with 2 letters to send, you find that there are 14 people in the queue, each person has less than 3 letters, and each one takes about a minute to dispose of his business, and instead of spending 30 minutes running from one counter to another, you find that in 14 minutes your turn comes and your letters are on the way. What is the difference in procedure which can be labeled procedure 1, the first experience where you had to go to a separate counter each time, and the second case where everything is put under one window and you do not have to run about from one place to another. This is a simple example of design of work. In the first case, there is the unity of work, all inquiries at one place, all weighing at one place, all stamp vending at one place, all registrations at one place. In second case, the design is design of multiple tasks put together, focused on the results, that is the registration of the letter, and the time taken to discharge the activity has been reduced by almost half. Now, that is an example of how design issues affect the effectiveness of running organizations. As I have maintained through these sessions with you, all of us have to deal with organizations. All of us are part of some organization. All of us have to understand organizations, because in the ultimate analysis, organizations determine all aspects of our everyday life. However, the nature of organizations is not understood by many, and what are the elements which go into making of an organization. So, let me put with you a schematic diagram of what an organization basically looks like. This is a schematic diagram of an organization, and I have labeled it, for want of a better phrase, the organization's environment. The organization is contained in this circle, and as you notice, I have put 4 pillars within the circle: labor management relations, job design, technology, and payment system. The interactory relationship between labor management relations, job design, technology, and payment systems creates the organization structure. Now, we have already explained to you what an organization structure is all about, what is the function which it carries out. This is the stage in our discussion where I want you to understand and recognize that any organization structure stands on 4 pillars: labor management relationships, job design, technology, and payment system. Job design is what I just explained to you. It can be homogeneous, as in the first case of the post office that I explained, single tasks being clustered. It can be multitasking, as in the case of all the activities related to a registration letter being put together, and in all cases we will have to have a technology which has to work. The technology can be both hard and soft. Even a method of doing some work is a technology, and there must be a payment system to it, because everyone needs to earn a livelihood, and people in any work situation need to be compensated, which creates a labor management relationships. So, the organization therefore has these 4 pillars, and at the core of it is the organization structure. However, the organization has an external environment which has the following variables. There is always the government. Government is representative of a civil society. When a group of people get together and for the sake of order, safety, organized function, create a governance system, and the people who operate that governance system are called the government. Obviously, there are trade unions, unions of people who are workmen of one variety or another. There is, of course, the case of technical change, and the rate of technical change determines how the organization is going to function. Then there is the product market, and there are cultural and historical factors, which in this course have been captioned partly as longitudinal elements. Then there is the labor market. Labor market is the supply side of the people who enter an organization. So, what do we have? We have 6 variables in the environment where the organization is embedded, and we have the government, the trade unions, the rate of technical change, product market, cultural and historical factors, and the labor market. Now, this is roughly what an organization and its environment decomposed into its simple element looks like. So, if you want to understand an organization and the design elements in an organization, you have to first understand clearly how an organization relates to an environment, and here it is in its schematic form. Let me take you ahead of that to show to you how design of jobs are actually discharged in operational terms. Here, consistent with the preceding diagram, I have broken up the environment into the organizational variables, the social variables, and the management role and behavior. This needs to be explained. The organizational variables would be the goals, technology, and structure, which includes tasks of an organization. These are the organizational variables. Just as there are organizational variables, there are human variables. The human variables of an organization are capabilities, attitudes, values, needs, demographic characteristics. So, any organization moves on the organization and the human variables. If you can control the organizational variables, namely be clear about what the organization is about, the goals, the technology which operates in an organization, the structure and the tasks which are there, these are the organizational variables. I have also stated to you that the human variables will need to be decomposed, and they would turn out to be capabilities, attitudes, values, needs, and demographic characteristics, as I just mentioned a little while ago. Now, let us look at its backward linkage and its forward linkage. Be it organizational variables or be it human variables, it has, if you go back to the preceding diagram, linkages with the environment, which is in the form of government, trade unions, rate of technical change, product market, cultural and historical factors, as well as the labor market. If you link up organizational variables with environmental variables, what do you get? You get social needs, you get available resources, you get state of knowledge and socio-political variables. They enter into an interactory relationship with organizational variables. In other words, the environment through social needs, available resources, state of knowledge, socio-political values interacts with the goals, the technologies, the structure and the tasks which are organizational variables, and this is how the organizations start operating. This interaction creates what could be defined as management role and behavior. Management role and behavior again is in an interactory relationship with the organizational variables. So, what do you have? Three boxes: organizational variables in interaction with environment and organizational variables in interaction with the management role and behavior, and it is this management role and behavior which you are seeking to understand. Let us get to the flows of the second set of diagrams, the human variables. The human variables of capabilities, attitudes, values and needs, demographic characteristics are again interacting with certain environmental variables. The environmental variables here are societal values, values and norms, educational standards and opportunities. So, it is the same environment, but the variables which interact with the human variables, as you can clearly see from the diagram which is at the bottom of the projection, are different from the variables which interact with the organizational variables, which is the diagram on top of the projection. Therefore, environment interacts with the organizational variables in a different set of manifestations, and the environment interacts with the organizational variables with a different set of variables, but both together determine management role and behavior. So, to sum up this projection, organizational variables with human environmental variables create a certain mode of management role and behavior, and human variables with environmental variables create a certain mode of managerial role and behavior. So, the outcome is management role and behavior. Now, what would happen if management role and behavior, which arises out of organizational variables, and management role and behavior which arises out of human variables, were to be combined? I will come to that shortly, but I want you to absorb this diagram in its elements divided over 6 boxes, because this is fundamental to the issue of understanding design of organizations. So, I will pause there for a few moments for you to absorb the elements which are projected through the first set of 3 boxes and the second set of 3 boxes. If you combine them, what you get is the following diagram: management role and behavior, and on one side the organizational variables, the other side the human variables. This is collapsing the diagrams which you just saw, and I will show it to you again. These 6 variables boxes with their variables are combined in this diagram as organizational variable on one hand, human variables on other hand, environment on both the sides, and you have just seen this in the preceding projection. Just to refresh your memory, take a look at the preceding projection again: organizational variables, human variables, environment on both sides, management role and behavior as the outcome. Now, what we are doing is moving management role and behavior to the center, putting organizational variables on one side and the human variables on the other side, and of course, environment dealing with both. So, what do you have? As I have already explained to you, you have organizational variables which have goals, technologies, structures and tasks, and you have human variables which have capabilities, attitudes, values and needs and demographic characteristics. And this is the design of functioning of an organization, where management role and behavior integrates the organizational variables and human variables. What do you get out of this? You get the definition of management action. So, the design of an organization really spells out the elements of managerial action which actually govern an organization. So, what we are going to do now is going to project in a bigger format management role and behavior. What are the elements there which integrate organizational variables and human variables? So, please be prepared for the next set of diagram, where this box will be projected bigger, and you will see the various action points which will be integrating organizational variables with human variables. So, the emphasis will be on the word integration. What you find in this diagram is again organizational variables on one side, human variables on the other side. The basic composition of organizational variables, goals, technologies, structures, tasks is listed, just as basic elements of human variables, capabilities, attitudes, values, needs and democratic characteristics are needed. But the contribution of this diagram lies in the 5 integrative mechanisms which you find listed here, and that is management action. What are the 5 elements I want to draw your attention to? One is direction, that is decision and policy making supervision. You integrate the organizational variables and human variables through direction. You integrate the organizational variables and human variables through organization and job design. Please remember, organization and job design are one facet of design activities of an organization. What I am showing to you is also the design element in an organization, because the arrows which are integrating the two boxes in saffron color, the organizational variables and the human variables, are components of managerial role and behavior. Therefore, these 5 elements, to take you back to the preceding diagram, are the design of management's role and behavior. And this design has 5 elements: direction, organization and job design, selection, training, appraisal and development, communication and control system, and reward system. Let us get back to selection, training and appraisal and development. The selection component shows the identification of the optimal set of skill clusters which would be represented by a person who would be an employee of an organization being identified. So, that is a selection procedure. He would need to be trained, and the appraisal will have to be carried out to find out whether he is a growing person or whether he has stopped growing and no longer responds to the requirements of an organization. And there has to be a feedback to him, so that he continues to develop. So, putting it quite simply, selection, training, appraisal and development would be the integrative mechanisms at a certain level of the organizational and human variables. Then we come to the 4th component, that is the communication and control system. The communication and control system is also very useful in putting together the organizational and the human variables. The organization and the human variables are put together by a manager through the integrative mechanisms, 3 clusters of which have been noted already, and now I am drawing your attention to the 4th cluster, that is communication and control. And finally, in looking at the design of managerial role and function, there is the reward system, because in the ultimate analysis, contributions to the functioning of the organization have to be rewarded if you are going to create the right values. So, all these are design considerations in running of an organization, and this is the design of what could be called the managerial role and behavior. There is a design consideration in the organizations which are called organizational variables, and the design consideration has the following component: goals, technology, structure and task. There are design components of the human variable. They are listed as capabilities, attitudes, values, needs, demographic characteristics. Hence, you are being helped to see how design issues are central to the functioning of the organization. I do not have to explain the design of environment, because that has been explained in the preceding diagram, where you noticed that a selection has been carried out of the design of environment which is relevant to organizational variables, and a selection has been carried out of the design of the environment which is relevant to the human variables. Therefore, now you have a design perspective on the environment, you have a design perspective on organizational and human variables, and you have a design perspective on the integrative mechanisms of a managerial role function. Again, I am going to pause there for a few moments, so that you can absorb the full import of this diagram. If you are with me so far on the design issues which affect an organization, I am now going to walk you through with some of the options which are available for organizations per se. In other words, I want you to be clear that when you put together tasks, you get a job design. Please remember the example of the post office. But when you pull together various jobs, you get an organization design. And let me illustrate to you how this could give shape to the organization. But before we do that, to understand how those variables would work, please realize that organizational variables will have two clusters as explained in this central block: the structural variables and the interpersonal and social variables. The organizational variables, broken up into structural variables and interpersonal or social variables, both of which are derived from the preceding projections I made, will have in the structural component organization structure, job structure, the personnel policies and practices, pay scales, controls, and selection and training. These 5 are selections of the structural variables. In the interpersonal and social variables, you will have leadership and supervision, you will have communication, you have interpersonal variables, and you have group processes. This is how the design of activities in an organization is structured, and this is how it operates. So, please understand, any organizational variable can have two broad components: the structural variables and the interpersonal variables. The inputs come from the needs, expectations, and competencies. Needs of the society, expectations of people working in the organization, and competencies of the socio-technical system in an organization. The output would be productivity, commitment, satisfaction, flexibility, personal development, plant image, and the resultant factor will be profit and growth. So, please recognize a flow element: inputs to organizational variables. From organizational variables you have an output, and from an output you have the profit and growth. But there is an internal flow amongst the boxes which are shown by this diagram. These arrows show an input, but from the organizational variables there is a feedback mechanism as shown by this arrow here back to the input, and similarly the flow from the output to the profit and growth dimension has a flow back to the organizational variables. So, the closed loop has different phases, and this is how an organization really works. Again, I will pause there for a few moments, so that you are able to get the different elements of the 4 boxes which are presented there: the input box, the organizational variables, the output, and the resultant factor, therefore, that is profit and growth. If you have been able to absorb this projection, then it is about time I walked you through 3 slides and project the some of the options which are available for job design. Please remember, any of these interventions are capable of causing higher efficiency or capable of lowering the efficiency. The example was the post office. Now, if I were to explain to you the different forms of organization design, you will be able to see for yourself how the manager really can control these variables of input, organization, the output, to create effectiveness parameters for the organization. Before you are 2 types of organizational forms, but before we get to these 2 types, let us look at this. This is popularly called the pyramidal type of a structure, clearly hierarchical, running at 3 levels: the operational level, the middle level and the top level. Simplified for the sake of your understanding, because each one of these pyramids may be a different department, but even though it may be a different department, it is put together in a system which has an obligation to operate for the purposes of organizational growth. Therefore, you find that this pyramid, like this pyramid, like this pyramid, is relating to the pyramid on top, and the number of pyramids gets reduced from 3 to 2 to 1, which is typical of the way a pyramidal structure works. In each case, you find that there is a job design here. This round circle here is supposed to be significant of a job design. This is called the linking pin. This job here has the responsibility of coordinating the functioning of this pyramid with this pyramid. Similarly, this job design here has the responsibility of coordinating the functioning of the pyramid below with the pyramid on top, and so it goes on. In this pyramid, we show 3 linking pins, but it is not as if the pyramids consist only of linking pins. There can be a job design here, there can be a job design here, there can be a job design here. In other words, even within the pyramid, there can be 3, 4, 5 or multiple levels of hierarchy. This is a schematic diagram to help you to understand how organizations can possibly be designed, but this is perhaps the simplest and the most elementary form of work organization, and in operational terms there are any number of variables which are possible to arise from the different types of job designs, which here are reflected in the form of circle. Now, what happens if 5 circles are in a loose interactory relationship like this, which is called the collegial form? Now, none of them is reporting to another. This is typical of the way a college or an educational system works. People in a department are all in some kind of communication or relationship with each other, but none of them are really reporting to each other. The same 5 job designs in this pentagonal structure, again flat at that, there is no hierarchy here, is put in a certain type of relationship and linked quite visibly, which demonstrates that each job design is in relationship with every other job design. What does this signify? What this signifies is that there are open channels of communication, and every job design has an obligation to pass on the information to every other job design. So, if there are 5 job designs, none of them can sit on any information, but every other job design will have access to the information which a job design has. So, this pentagonal form of organization structure of an organization is very different from a collegial form of organizational structure, and the difference is put together visibly, so that you can comprehend in a pictorial manner what is the distinction. Now, again, there is no value put on a collegial structure, just as there is no value put on a pentagonal structure. Incidentally, another expression which is used for a pentagonal structure is a project form of organization. So, this is also called a project form of organization. This project form of organization is always useful when no great command issues are there, but there are requirements of exchange of information and speedy discharge of work. Like many other designs, this has been borrowed from the industry, and this is typical of the design of work of a group which say goes behind the enemy lines to gather information. But this form is never conducive to a stable long range production concern, which is why it is called a project mode. It is disbanded as soon as its goals are accomplished. So, the lifespan of the pentagonal form or the project mode is forever limited. Open access of information, peer level relationship, flat structure, quick movement, total sharing, capable of maneuverability, therefore responding to project needs. When you have got a collegial form of structure, as in this case, this is a little more stable, but it is again a little more loose. Nobody really demands information from what the other job designs are up to. Now, each one of them has its needs, each one of them has its forms, which brings us to what is called a mixed matrix organization. In a mixed matrix organization, you find that there are different designs of divisions, department, work in a given organization. For example, there is the collegial form here, there is the pentagonal form here, there is the pyramidical form here, there is the pyramidical pentagonal form here, a pentagonal form here, a collegial form here, a pyramidical form here, and this is symbolically representative of the board, symbolized by the chairman who is there, level of board members put together in different circles. Now, what did the different circles show? The different circles showed that, say, this is the person who is director human resources. This could be a person who would be director finance. This could be a person who could be director R&D. So, the positions in these different boards are symbolic of the key figure in the board responsible for that division or that function. The other circles on the board would be representative of the independent directors, government directors, or directors who may have a portfolio, but it has not been possible to show in the diagram itself. What you find here in the mixed matrix format is really a full fledged organization at work, meant to explain to you that it is always possible to have different types of job designs for different divisions of an organization, depending upon what is the nature of the organization and what is the nature of the subdivision of the organization. An R&D division being different from a manufacturing division, being different from a finance division, being different from a project division. because it is not as if all the divisions of an organization must have the same design. To explain therefore, the nuances of design concerns in an organization, for this part of the narration you need to recognize that in the ultimate analysis we have a situation where we will have to develop the competencies of recognizing the crucial role design plays in functioning of an organization, how understanding of the design issues make it essential to understand the nature of the organization, how manipulating the design issues make it possible to intervene in the organization for improving the efficiency, and above all, no matter what happens in an organization, there is a design concern, because presumably organizations are functioning in a scientific mode. Therefore, there must be a systematic underpinning of structures, processes, procedures, which would result in some design of activity, which ultimately is the essence of management action, management intervention, which makes it possible to develop organizations and their competencies in a manner which enriches and makes possible the concept of organizational effectiveness.